is Charter Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are in the nation's capital today, and we are joined by Tammy Baldwin. She is a member of the United States Senate representing the great state of Wisconsin. And I want to speak with you about trade, which so interestingly crosses party lines when you look at the question of free trade. What can you tell us about the concerns that you and your constituents have when we look at the question of free trade?
Well, first of all, I represent the state of Wisconsin, and some of the trade deals that we've had in the past have affected different states differently.
Right.
So you have to look at the overall economy of your state. We have a state that produces a lot of agricultural products. We're also one of the major manufacturing states in the United States. Nearly 20% of our workforce is engaged in manufacturing. That's near the top in the country. And one of the things that has really been a problem with past trade deals, specifically NAFTA, is the loss of manufacturing jobs, good paying, family supporting jobs, as a result of that trade deal and some others.
Well,
and so,
why would that be? Because you would think if you're opening up markets, more products to sell, in the case of NAFTA, to Canada and Mexico. If you have more customers, you got to produce more.
Right. Well, first of all, our state's export market existed prior to these trade deals.
Right.
But one of the things that has happened is that large multinational corporations that own some of these manufacturing enterprises have decided to head to the places that have the least amount of worker protections, say for a decent minimum wage, safety protections, even making sure that there are laws against child labor, for example. Oftentimes also we've seen outsourcing to areas that don't have any environmental protection regimen.
But as we look at what's known as the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, one could argue that there have been efforts made to make sure that as part of the negotiation that would go on with the administration and the, I think it's 12 nations, that those issues would be addressed. The questions of environmental laws, labor laws.
So there's been a lot of promises made. Unfortunately, the proof is in the pudding, as they say, and unfortunately these have been negotiated behind closed doors. The text has not been made available to the public, and most members of Congress have not had an opportunity to actually read it and feel and assess whether they feel that these negotiating principles have actually been met. And frankly, it's not done yet, so how would we know whether they successfully negotiated these provisions?
But that becomes the question, because when I've had the honor to speak with supporters of free trade, most generally, because of course you've not made a decision, I mean, who knows what's going to come down the pike, what they would say is, well, under the bills that are being passed that looks at the TPP and TPA, that Congress will get to see the final deal, that the American public will get to see the final deal. And so how would you respond?
So here's the issue. So with the issue of fast track, which tells the Congress, or Congress cedes the power to actually amend and shape and improve these bills. They get simply an up or down vote, a yes or no vote on the TPP, later on TTIP, which is the trade negotiation going on with the European Union. When you cede that power without first reading the details of the agreement, that's a big deal. And frankly, when you come from a manufacturing state like I do, it's a very big concern.
But how would you respond to those that would say, look, if I am Australia or New Zealand or Singapore or Japan, one of those 12 nations, why would I go through an extensive negotiation with the United States government when point A could be undone? Because the contract, let's call it, will go back to the Congress and they'll get to slice and dice it. How do we respond to that?
Well, first of all, I am sympathetic to that argument that it is tough to enter a negotiation with 12 countries, let alone with 12 countries in their entire parliaments,
Right.
or
Well
in our
stated.
case,
Yes.
535
Right.
members of Congress. That's why it's so important that the conditions that we want to see, the provisions that we want to see in a final agreement are sort of locked in up front in the fast track legislation. So you say, we want to see a deal that guarantees that worker rights, that religious freedom,
Sure.
that human rights, that environmental protections are going to be negotiated and a part of that agreement. And then when you get it,
Right.
there's fewer concerns that these things are left unaddressed.
But if you look at the list of nations, I mean, generally speaking, they are Western, but not all. I mean, you have Brunei, you have Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore. I mean, some of those nations have been known for being less than protective of human rights. I don't mean to cast aspersions on our friends, but
Right.
and so even if we get these protections put in, is there an enforcement mechanism?
Well, that's a key question, is what does, there can be great provisions, but if there's no teeth, that's
Right.
a problem. And I would just mention a couple of things. First of all, with the TPP, we're talking about nearly 40%
Right.
of the world's economy.
Which could be exciting.
That's huge.
And could be exciting for
It
our
could be
nation.
exciting, although we already trade with most
Well
of
stated.
those nations.
Well stated.
And there's the question of whether ultimately China would be allowed to enter into this deal at a later point in time. There is a provision that we understand is being negotiated that would allow that consideration at a later point in time. But I would say right now, just representing the state of Wisconsin, we have issues already with some of the trade practices in Vietnam, for example. We also have issues with China having certain maybe assembly of a product that they produce in China, they assemble it in Vietnam, and then they ship it to the U.S., trying to get around the fact that they're not a part of this. So these are issues that in a manufacturing state like mine, we have to be very concerned about. And then Brunei, I do want to mention that, has recently passed a very intolerant law relating to religious freedom, especially cracking down on expressions of Christianity, the celebration of Christmas and Santa Claus, so not necessarily the religious reflection, but some very harsh laws that I think we need to be concerned about also.
And I don't want to make light of that, but I do think we have to talk about Wisconsin cheese.
Well, we do in the context of trade,
exactly,
too.
Because let's face it, I mean, we love our Wisconsin cheese, and interestingly, cheese could be implicated in the trade deal.
Yes, so this is much more an issue relating to the trade deal that's being negotiated with the countries in the European Union.
The T-tip. Thank you.
Thank you. T-tip. What we have seen the European Union do in recent trade deals, including one with Canada, is insist upon being able to exclusively use the name of products, agricultural products in particular, from certain regions
like Bordeaux
or communities.
wine? Is it Bordeaux?
Yes.
Right.
So Parmesan cheese, Asiago cheese, feta cheese. Now the Swiss aren't in the European Union, so
right.
we're not yet talking
Right.
about Swiss cheese, but that could come up later. So a whole series of product names that disproportionately would affect the state of Wisconsin, again, because we are the #1 cheese producer in the country and have frankly mastered some of these recipes. How would you brand and sell
If you
your
can't
cheese?
say feta, right.
Gouda.
Right.
The list goes on. Now, it affects beer, too.
And you'll come back and talk about that the next time you come
Yes.
back. Her name is Tammy Baldwin, member of the U.S. Senate from Wisconsin. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter Local Edition.